I'm absolutely delighted that we're able to take a bit of time out of the day to sit with Scott Bastick, licensed insolvency practitioner, and Lauren Brown, a manager of 16 years standing at Middlebrooks. What we were wanting to have a bit of a chat about, and something that we get asked lots when you're facing closing down your business, whether you're a sole trader or a limited company, is the right time to tell people. What I thought we could talk about today was some of the questions that you've been asked in that regard, so that we can let other people know about it. So in your experience, Lauren, in your day-to-day life, you quite often sit with directors that are looking to close down a limited company. What type of things do you say to them about when to tell people? Probably if we look at more business contacts first.
So yeah, when we sit down and if a director's come to us and they're looking for a process in terms of if it's company's going into liquidation, they're not often quite nervous about dealing with their suppliers and their employees. And I would always say, just be honest. If the company is in financial distress, you've taken the right steps to either place it into liquidation or seek advice from an insolvency practitioner. So I'd always just say be honest with them. Quite often we can give advice, we can give them paperwork that they can hand out, or we can speak to the creditors and employees on their behalf. So I guess it's really finding what works best. If you have a close contact supplier that you use often, you might want to deliver that information yourself before they receive the formal paperwork from us. So it really is just dependent on the situation.
And have you seen people doing it in different ways? Written communication, Harry Potter owl, letters. What type of
I've
things?
seen people social media putting out a notice. Quite often they'll explain, they've traded for a long time and they want to put that notice out themselves and explain what's happened to the business and the reason that they've had to take the steps that they've had to take. I've seen, a notice in the window, and formal written communication as well. As I say, it really just depends on the type of business that you're running and how you want to communicate that out to your suppliers and your employees.
And one of the things that you mentioned there that I thought was quite good and might be quite helpful is the fact that you could be standing beside the director or people from Middlebrooks. In your experience, what has that looked like?
Quite often it's good to be there because we can answer any questions. Quite often if it's a director who is making employees redundant, they don't know all of the information that needs to be provided. So if we're standing beside them, we can give them that information straight away. There's no waiting. And quite often we can allay any fears that the employees might have and give them, explain the process that we'll need to follow.
Scott, we've been speaking there with Lauren about the kind of more practical telling people. As a licensed insolvency practitioner, is there anything from a legal perspective that people need to do? Are there any points that they need to meet when telling people?
Yeah, I think the directors need to be particularly careful when they know the business is going to fail, that they don't take any actions that worsen the position overall for creditors, or deal with any assets in a way whereby they could be subject to criticism at a later date in terms of misappropriation or preferring one party over another. So in reality, what we would look to do is we would look to engage with them, keep them right in terms of how that process would look, and make sure that they're not taking any actions that could be subject to criticism further down the line.
Mm-hmm. And Lauren mentioned earlier that we could stand beside people. And on a day-to-day basis in your experience, what type of things what does that sort of look like?
More often than not, it's the employees that cause the most concern for the directors. Obviously, they've been working together for a long period of time. There's almost a personal responsibility that's felt towards the employees. So what we would tend to find is some directors, whilst they want to address the employees, they're still looking for us to be there almost in a bit of a hand-holding exercise and to give them the statutory information, the sort of less emotive element of it, to be there for them. Others just can't face speaking to the employees at all. And on that basis, what we would do is we would be there to provide them with information they need in order to assist them with making their claims, etc., for their statutory entitlements. It just really varies from case to case, and it's more down to the individual directors themselves as to how they want that to look. The creditor side of things is slightly less of an issue. Whilst there can be long-standing relationships, quite often with the creditors, what will happen is they'll find out by third-party jungle drums, etc., will kind of go out there, and failing which, what they would do is they would obviously be notified of the liquidation as part of the process in terms of the circulars being issued. So the creditor side of things is less of an issue. Sometimes there'll be creditors whereby significant amounts that are due, whereby the directors will look to make contact with them, having worked with them for a number of years. But in general, that just kind of follows the statutory process more often than not.
It's really interesting, especially the fact that the theme for a lot of these things, whenever we're speaking to anybody, is the fact that it does vary from case to case. And I guess what we're chatting about today is, in our experience, this is what we've seen happening. Another topic that I often have directors put to me is how they might, tell the wider non-business world about the fact that this has failed and what that looks like and things. In your experience, Lauren, when you've been sat in front of a director who said those types of things, what's your response to that?
I guess case by case, it really depends on the situation. But I mean, just be honest. Just explain, I've taken steps to wind up my company because it's not in a financially stable situation anymore. It's in financial distress and I've taken the right advice. And I think just being honest up front at the beginning is the best course of action.
It sometimes can be difficult in that sense.
It can, yeah. And I think just being honest is the best way to be. I mean, like Scott was saying, jungle drums will be, it'll come round. So it's best just to be open at the beginning.
It's a difficult situation to find yourself in. And Scott, I won't make you blush by how many years you've been doing this, but I would imagine that you've had quite similar conversations with directors over the years. I guess what we're straying more into is the more personable, emotional side of these types of things. And I just wonder, from your perspective, how you deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think over the years, having spoke to a number of directors, whilst they feel terrible and think it's the only person that's ever happened to, the sad reality, the fact is that it happens on a daily basis for a number of companies. I think also if people didn't strive to open up companies and take these risks, essentially we wouldn't have an economy at all. So I think, whilst it's easy for us to say when we're sitting at the other side of the table, I think the reality of it is it's never as bad as what they think it is. It's never as bad a situation as how they interpret it to be. And for a lot of them, what they'll do is they'll dust themselves off, they'll go away, lick their wounds for a little while and then start up again, having learnt the lessons of the business that's actually failed previously. And even now, I'll still see directors for companies that I was, involved in the liquidations of 10, 15 years ago that are now very, very successful. It doesn't have to be the end of the world. It doesn't have to be the end of their, their careers, etc. At that point, I fully appreciate the fact that it's a sore one for them. But the reality of it is it doesn't last forever. Most of them will bounce back, or alternatively, they'll move forward without the daily stress of having to deal with, not being able to pay the debts, worrying about how the staff are going to be paid, etc. And then let's admit, I mean, most directors, by the time we see them, most of them are working for free, in order to ensure that the business is able to continue for a period of time. It's not a reflection on their ability in terms of running a business. It's just it can be a number of factors that's led them to that position.
That's really insightful, and especially the bit about the fact that there's been a number of months of stress that's led up to the meeting. In your time dealing with these directors, Lauren, and I appreciate that there are sometimes difficult conversations to be had, but have you ever experienced some feedback from the directors after the fact, after they've told everybody, and how they're then feeling at that point?
Yeah, normally it's a huge weight off their shoulders. They've been carrying this around, they've not known what to do, and that's why they've come to us for advice. And once they get that and see the steps involved, the process, how we'll help them with that, quite often it's just a huge weight lifted off their shoulders, and they normally go away feeling a lot better about the situation.
Oh, that's good to hear, given that we're trying to help with those positive futures that Scott was talking about. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add to that, Scott, from your perspective.
Yeah, I always remember doing a liquidation about 10 years ago. It was one of the first appointments I took once I was licensed, and it was a creditor petition. The director was very, very hostile when we turned up on day one at the trading premises. To the extent that he actually contacted his son to come along and sitting in the meeting because he felt he was going to potentially reach a stage of punching me. And we managed to resolve it all. Everything went reasonably well. There was a solution to what the situation was, and I bumped into him about 5 years later when I was out shopping one weekend with my wife. And I didn't realise who the guy was, but he came up to us and introduced himself and said, "Do you remember me?" And he was like, "I'm so sorry for how I behaved." He was like, honestly, he was like, I was embarrassed afterwards. But it took him a few months to realise the fact that we had kind of resolved the situation for him. So yeah, that was one of the sort of cheerier ones.
It's nice to hear, because one of the things that I have often felt in this process is we've got a role that we've got to perform, but sitting in behind that role are people that have set up businesses and have been running businesses, and for whatever reason that business isn't continuing forward. And the reason that we picked this topic today was maybe to provide a roadmap to people that are directors that have gone down this route before. And I guess from what you were both saying in summary is that, taking the bull by the horns and having the conversations, ripping off the plaster is probably the best way to do it. But aided with some of the documentation that you were speaking about, Lauren, and the fact, Scott, that you've actually even stood beside the directors as well, so that from a legal perspective, they don't need to worry about that, but can help people on their way.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, people can seek advice. They don't need to act upon it. Whilst they should, but the reality of it is equally, there's been businesses that we have seen over the years whereby we've been able to find other solutions for them. That haven't necessarily resulted in a formal insolvency appointment, but the businesses have been able to be restructured in some way whereby they've been able to continue as was previously, with adjustments being made. The biggest issue we face is the fact that if people come at the last minute, there's so little we can do. In reality, if they're up against it, they've got no cash in the bank, etc., then at that point, what you're looking at generally would be an insolvency process, unless there's something whereby someone can inject funds into it. But if people come early enough, then what we're able to do is there's a wider kind of spectrum of what we can offer up.
And would you say that the barrier to people coming earlier is that stigma?
There's definitely an element of that. For some people, it's to do with the stigma or the perceived perception that they've failed. But it's genuinely the most sensible thing they can do. Once they start to kind of see that they're in a position whereby distress is either there or it's on the cards, then the earlier they can seek advice, the better. But I think for a lot of people, there is a degree of embarrassment associated with it, and they don't fully understand what the process is. For most people, they'll go through life not ever having to have any kind of involvement at all in an insolvency process. So for a lot of them, others will go through it multiple times, and they'll understand after the first time that ignoring all the advice they're given through their mates or down the pub, etc., all of that part of it, it's not actually as bad, or it's for some of them it's not as good as what they expected it to be, but for most of them it's not as bad as what they actually expect it to be.
Oh, thanks very much. I think that's been really insightful today, and hopefully it's going to be helpful for those directors that are worried about having those conversations, and that there is confidential advice that they can get out there to help them have them. Thank you all.
Thank you.